And so, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we are now live streaming, and Madam Vice Chair, it's your meeting.
Okay. So as most of you probably know, Kofi is not with us this evening. And so as the Vice Chair, I would like to call this meeting of the Community Task Force to order. We continue to meet virtually due to pandemic-related orders and restrictions. And we'll start with roll call.
Okay, I'll do it here. So, Bridget Marie.
Here.
Isao Soji.
Here.
Vincent Wong.
Here.
Sami Bapana.
Here.
Will Knapp. Will, are you with us? Okay, I think Will can only listen, but I see he's on, so we're going to count him in.
He just chatted here.
Oh,
he put in the chat.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Rama Bilakanti.
Yes.
Jamil Robinson.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamil. I think that's everyone then. So you have a quorum.
Great. And you guys, thank you so much for, prioritizing the meeting and trying to get here when you can. It is important work. And I know everyone's busy, and apparently Will's at a volleyball game. So Rama, I don't know you, but thank you for showing up. We really do appreciate it. We need a quorum so we can get through this agenda. And the agenda does start as typical with subcommittee updates and some reports. And I think Kirby was going to share some info on demographics.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good evening, members of the task force. As you may have seen in your packet this week, staff put together a demographic assessment and terminology document for your review. I'm going to hit some of the highlights of that and garner some feedback regarding demographics and the terminology. Like I said, we're going to run through the demographic assessment, which consists of racial demographics, resident language other than English, age demographics, housing demographics, then we're going to talk about the terminology. So first, like I said, racial demographics. The city of Dublin is comprised of many unique communities with diverse perspectives and traditions. For example, almost 20% of Dublin households speak a language other than English at home, compared to only 13.5% of Franklin County households and 7.2% of households across Ohio. One of these established communities includes the Asian community. Within Franklin County and the state of Ohio, Asian Americans account for 5.7% and 2.5% of residents respectively. However, the Asian community accounts for 18.3% of residents of the city of Dublin. However, the Asian community accounts for only 2% of City of Dublin staff. Black Americans make up 23.8% and 13.1% of the Franklin County and state of Ohio populations, respectively, but only 2.3% of Dublin residents. The proportion of Black Americans who make up the City of Dublin workforce is largely in line with that of the community at 4%. Hispanic or Latinx Americans currently make up 4.7% of Dublin residents, 5.8% of Franklin County residents, and 4% of Ohio residents. Although Hispanic and Latinx individuals make up almost 5% of Dublin's residents, members of this community only account for 2% of the Dublin workforce. Now we're going to be talking about age, education, and housing demographics. The majority of Dublin's population consists of members of Generation Z and Generation X, with baby boomers and millennials following closely behind. This age distribution is unique to the city of Dublin, as millennials are significantly more prevalent than all other generations in Franklin County as a whole. Additionally, millennials are the largest generation in the state of Ohio at large. One strength of the city of Dublin is the value of homes in the area. Dublin's median property value reached $371,800 in 2018, with an average monthly mortgage totaling $2,586. Of the total Dublin housing stock, 76.1% of homes are owner occupied. For reference, Franklin County and the state of Ohio's median property values in 2018 were roughly half of that of the city of Dublin. Additionally, Franklin County and Ohio's owner-occupied rates were recorded at 53.4% and 66.1%, so significantly lower. Additionally, Black and Asian Americans account for a disproportionately larger percentage of total renters in the city of Dublin, whereas white residents account for a disproportionately smaller percentage of total renters in the city of Dublin. The strong housing market can be partially attributed to the number of college-educated Dublin residents and the comparatively low unemployment rates within the community. In fact, 74.6% of Dublin residents hold at least a bachelor's degree, compared to the 40% of Franklin County residents and 28.3% of Ohioans at large. Additionally, the city's unemployment rate is significantly lower than that of the region and the state. All of this information was provided to you in a demographics brief alongside our terminology. So I wanted to take a moment and check in with you and ask a few questions. Is the language used within this demographic assessment appropriate? Are all of the areas of interest or concern referenced? And would you like to see any changes to the demographic assessment?
Herbie, there were some facts that you shared, notes, I guess you have, that aren't actually part of the slides. I think that I'd like to see if you could share those maybe via email.
Sure. Everything that I shared today is in the demographic assessment and is within the text of that document.
So it is within the 6 slides that you sent?
No, it is within the brief that I sent out.
Okay.
That is the text that will eventually, unless you all have edits or would like to see changes, be incorporated into our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan that we would be bringing forth to council. So by and large, the PowerPoint was just a way to communicate what is in that document.
I think I did not see that document. I was looking at the slides that were sent. I didn't realize that the analysis, the Dublin demographic analysis, was also sent. So I apologize for not taking a look at it. I personally want to take a closer look at it, and then I can, I guess, email you directly if there was anything that I was thinking of.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Kirby, how much historical information is there with the type of information that was presented today? So we got a snapshot today. Is there a trend that is available on how these metrics have moved over, say, the last 3 to 4 decades?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. Most of the information that you saw today is from 2018, except for the renter versus owner occupied rates by race. Those are from the 2010 census and will not be updated until our current census is released. We work off of a software called Esri, where we're rather limited about to what has been put into that software. I personally have not dug into it to try to find trend data. I was really just looking for a snapshot, but that's absolutely something that I can look into and get back to you on.
Okay, thank you.
So just one clarification. Did you say that this data was from the previous census?
All of the data except for the owner and lease occupied rates by race is from a 2018 ESRI report. So that is the most up-to-date and accurate data that we could get our hands on currently.
Okay. You had also raised on as far as language used. My only thing as far as the categories, I don't know. I know you have there 2 or more races. I think I've seen in other places where it states would prefer not to, or something like that. It gives that freedom.
So the only struggle with addressing the names of the categories is that information was taken via survey. So by changing the name, we're misrepresenting what they identified as when they took the survey. So I absolutely hear and empathize with what you're saying, and I think moving forward for future surveys, that's a really good point. It's something we should look at. However, when looking at past data, I would tread lightly on changing how people identified themselves.
How much granular can we get with this type of information for distribution within Dublin? Is it down to zip codes, 1.6 versus 1.7?
So that's not something that I have personally seen. JM may be able to answer that because I know that planning works with the ESRI data a little more often. However, the information that I was provided from our data and metrics team is specific to the boundaries of the city of Dublin.
And can I confirm the category where I forget what the exact wording was, where somebody identifies as more than 2 races, is that the category? That means if they check that category, we don't know what 2 races. They're not being double counted, but they are in fact counted in this category that doesn't let us maybe have quite as much specificity as to what those 2 races are.
Correct.
We're getting good at waiting for each other. Does anybody else have anything right now on this specific topic for Kirby? Just speak up.
I have a quick question for Kirby. Kirby, Nick, so the breakdown of the demographic is based on the Dublin boundary, not necessarily it is overlapping with Dublin schools, right?
Correct. It is only the jurisdiction of the city of Dublin.
Yeah,
And
it's quite informative. Go ahead. Sorry, Bridget.
no, Vincent, along that line, I think certainly in our economics and infrastructure subcommittee, you know, it has come up pretty frequently. I think Colleen Gilger calls it Dublin adjacent. We do have a pretty strong interest in understanding probably the demographics of folks who are in fact not in Dublin proper, but are in the Dublin City School District for a whole host of reasons, primarily because those folks identify as being part of Dublin. So is that something that in the, you know, can you get more info on that, or in the next survey, and maybe you could tell us when the next survey is planned? Can we get some info on that?
I can reach out to the school district or also internally and see if that's some information that I can pull together for our next meeting to update this document. And I can get back to you on that. I think it's a very good point, and I think it would functionally work well with a comparison of Dublin City staff, City of Dublin jurisdiction, Dublin City Schools, Franklin County, and then the state of Ohio.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think this school, because Dublin is kind of different school districts, it'll be hard to find demographic information. Maybe the school district, they have something that can help you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you.
All right, unless there are any other questions, I have our terminology list to review and some questions associated with that as well. So in our last meeting, Steve Francis walked through Pacific University of Oregon's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Glossary of Terms, in which we all agreed it was somewhat exhaustive, and it's frequently updated as well. And if I remember correctly, we all accepted this as a document that could serve as our terminology within our future Dublin Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan. And so first, and it was included in your packet this week as well. So first, I kind of want to ask the same questions. Do you feel that this language that's used throughout these terms is appropriate? Do you feel that all of the areas of interest are referenced within this list? And would you like to see any additions or retractions or changes?
I did a very cursory search for something similar to this, and and I will emphasize the word cursory there. I did not necessarily see anything else that would come close to the breadth of what we're looking at here from this specific site. Not being the expert in this field, I may not be aware of some of the finer points, but in general, for what we're doing, I don't see why this cannot be a common set of terminologies for us to work with.
My only concern is, and I couldn't tell from the website just how often they do update it. Like, for example, cast is not in there, and after Isabel Wilkerson's book, I feel like that is definitely a term that should be in the glossary. So as long as we can confirm they are semi-regularly updating it, I think that's good on lots of levels, where they might change certain definitions and then also add words that are becoming more used.
In light with that, I'm sorry, I was going to say, Bridget, yeah, in light with that, I see that you have black as a definition, and I know that we are referencing to a lot of black and brown is what type in here. I don't see brown. I don't know how going to maneuver around that. I know you have the Black Indigenous people of color, and then you have black, but there is no brown, and that's kind of a common term right now.
And we think, was it Stephen Francis who recommended this list to us? Yeah. Maybe we can just at least confirm that they're doing updates or they're open to them. And then also when we're missing words like brown or cast or something else, you know, if we need a common definition, we can try to come up with one. If everyone feels comfortable with that. And I don't know if we need to officially adopt this as, you know, the terminology resource. We haven't officially done that. I don't know that it's necessary. Maybe we can just generally, unless somebody disagrees, we can just sort of generally approve the idea that we'll go with this source for now.
So since Kirby's presented this, and what's your overall recommendation for the task force? What can we take action? What kind of action can we take on it?
Well, I think from staff's perspective, we were suggesting with Stephen Francis's advice to, adopt a glossary of terms so that we have a sort of a common vernacular to work from. It's going to be ever changing. We know that, and there will be additions, and there may be some, as you point out, there could very well be some terms that are left off. Probably not intentional by Pacific universities, or maybe, I don't know, but they're the ones that seem to be on top of the latest terminology. But if there are other terms that should be introduced, or you feel should be added, I look at this, whatever your DEI plan turns out to be as a living document going forward, and something will keep up to date and review routinely and make sure it's relevant and current. So I think what we were looking for was some sort of adoption of a common use of terms. And certainly the dialogue here could be whether you think that's appropriate or not. If you do think it's appropriate, then this is what we would recommend. And again, it doesn't have to be this, but that's, I think, the best we can find. And given Stephen's recommendation, felt that it was the best one to advance. Hope that makes sense.
I was wondering, that does make sense. Can we add a clause here? Because these are all constructs, so they're subject to change depending on various factors. So even with a glossary, just keep that, but also add, like a clause that, as you're saying, to point out that is a living document, it's going to change because they're not based on solid, definitions.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I think what I would suggest is maybe a motion to adopt the glossary of terms and subject to continuous update. I think a motion could be to adopt the Pacific University glossary of terms subject to ongoing updates.
I agree. So the terminologies are evolving, and this document is a living document. I think what we are doing is basically after the city staff has done all the research, and I can see that it's a pretty comprehensive document. We can say this is a reference document. If we need to look up terminology, we go here first, knowing that this reference, it is being updated.
Is that a motion, Vincent? Is that a motion to adopt the Pacific University terms with the expectation that we'll update it when necessary?
Yeah, I can motion that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I motion to adopt the Pacific University Oregon's glossary of terminology for diversity and inclusion as a reference source for us, and knowing that it is going to be updated on an ongoing basis.
I second that.
And then all in favor, do you want to raise your hands and say yes? Yes?
Yes.
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 We can't see everybody. Does anybody want to say no?
Yes.
Anybody want to say no? So I think that means it's passed. Thank you.
Bridget, before we move on, or I'm sorry, Kirby, you still have more to present.
We're going to go through our aspirational goals next by subcommittee. So I am not presenting, but some of the subcommittee members are.
Bridget, I was just going to recommend that before you go on to that we go back and adopt the review and approval of minutes before we forget.
Very good. Yes. As a vice chair, am I allowed to move and or second things?
You can move and then someone else can second.
Okay. So I'm moving that we approve the minutes from our meeting 4 weeks ago in March, the last community task force meeting. Can I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. If you're willing to approve, if you'd raise your hand and or say yes, or chat us with a yes.
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 And is anybody not approving the minutes?
I'm sorry, who seconded that? Because we didn't quite catch it.
Vincent?
Vincent.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that means we got enough yeses that they're approved. Thank you. So on our agenda, subcommittee updates, I don't know if there's somebody planning to speak on Kofi's behalf, a member of the Communication and Education Subcommittee. And can you give us an update?
I was going to speak because Kofi's not here. I think he's pulling up the slides.
Thank you.
So under public engagement, under communications and outreach, we said the city should work to continuously understand the communal diversity within Dublin while promoting a welcoming environment by building relationships and trust with the community. Under leadership development, the city must promote understanding of Dublin's government and the community at large by recruiting diversity into the city's leadership and education efforts. And then for reflective government and city practices, the city should create an interest in local government among diverse members of the community and recruit representatives of varying communities to participate in councils, boards, commissions, and academies. And then our next aspirational goal was community building and inclusion. On the next slide, I think.
Jamil, did you want to touch on youth engagement?
I could do that real quick. So with the youth engagement, we came up with 3 big bullet points. The first was to engage with the youth to understand their needs and concerns. And with that, we were thinking of we want to form it's a formal youth advisory committee that meets with the city. It's a city manager or is the city council. Do you know about that, Kirby? Just refresh me on that.
Yeah, those are some of the indicators that we were going to get into in our next meetings. However, today we're just talking about the aspirational goals that are on the slide.
Okay, so then yeah, for the youth engagement, we just want to make it. It is pivotal that the city treat the youth of Dublin as a relevant stakeholder, engaging and including representatives as much as possible.
Great, thank you.
And then under community building and inclusion, one of our goals was to commit to improve Dublin's inclusivity as a community. The city must commit to improving the community's inclusivity by providing its residents with opportunities to engage in DEI trainings, conversations, and awareness campaigns. And then in order to promote Dublin's diversity, it is important that the city take active measures to acknowledge, appreciate, and uplift diversity within the community in a public setting whenever possible.
So now I believe our subcommittee is looking for feedback, correct?
Was the community inclusion slide, was that one of the, I wasn't clear if that was a subpart or a separate group of aspirational goals? Like, is community building and inclusion on the very first slide or is it a separate priority area or list of aspirational goals?
Sami, do you mind if I hop in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So public engagement is one of the priority areas that the Communication and Education Subcommittee has been tasked with tackling, if you will. So each of the bullet points, the bolded items, are our aspirational goals. The sentences afterwards are just general statements as to where we're going with our indicators moving forward, just so that you get an idea of what our general direction is. So our aspirational goals are communications and outreach, leadership development, youth engagement, reflective government practices. And then the same here, community building and inclusion was one of the priority areas that we were tasked with tackling. And our aspirational goals are commit to improve Dublin's inclusivity as a community and to promote Dublin's diversity. And then we go on to explain how we will eventually recommend that we do that as a community.
Thank you. So that's two aspirational goals. I know this will come up when I'm talking about economic empowerment. What if we don't have input right now because we want to spend a little bit more time with these topics? What do we think is the best way for all of us to share input so these drafts can get, modified and amended with everyone's input and concerns? I don't know if there's a standard process, or for example, economic empowerment, people could email me, Esau or Erica, because we're on the subcommittee. Is that what we think folks should do? Just email whoever's on that particular subcommittee?
Unless any of the task force members have any burning desire to hop in here, I would advocate that we use these meetings in a public setting to have conversations about the general direction today, where our aspirational goals are going. I think the reason that we set up the framework in this way is that we have specific touch bases where we can update you as to where we're going. And then at the end, we're not trying to turn the Titanic. And specifically, you guys could participate in conversation, and maybe, Bridget, your question will bring a question out of Vincent that otherwise he wouldn't have unless you brought up a really good point. So I think this is a really good opportunity to have some in-depth discussion if you have any opinions about the general direction, and to build off of each other in this public format. And if you don't have anything, that's okay. Because today very much is a directional touch base. We don't have those indicators ready yet where we're talking about specific action steps that the community or the city have to take. But generally, do you approve of, as other subcommittees, do you approve of this subcommittee's direction? And do you think that this is representative of your perspective?
And just to take some of the pressure off, I'd suggest you're not really having to vote on that tonight. Just, again, do you think that's generally a good direction to go? And then as they mature that with their indicators, they'll come back with that. So discussion here is great, or emailing with each other, sending in ideas is great too.
I think it's great where you guys are going. Awesome.
I think the only comment that I would have is the section about the city government or the city practices. I have a feeling that it's going to be a repeated comment in multiple subcommittees. So at some point we need to decide where that should fit, as opposed to each subcommittee saying the same thing over and over again. You will see, I think, when we start talking about the economic and infrastructure subcommittee as well.
Esau, are you talking about this slide that was provided in your packet for this week that has city practices? We haven't touched on it yet. That's the only reason why I'm asking.
No, I was talking about the fourth bullet point of public engagement slide, because it does say reflective government and city practices. And I assumed, when I heard the language about local government, diverse member of the community, and participation in boards, commissions, council, all of that sounded very familiar. So just wanted to throw that up there so that we are all aware. These are things that I think we all share in common as far as aspirational goals. At some point, we just need to figure out where that fits in the final document.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Esau.
And I think maybe one more. I try to remember where I saw it. I really liked it maybe it was the second page. I think it's important when we talk about communication or education to empower the diverse subpopulations of Dublin so that they feel the freedom and the encouragement to get involved. And it comes easier for some than others. For example, I think for immigrant communities that are not aware of or that are not very familiar with how the government or democracy or representative democracy in general works, just to be told get involved isn't going to be good enough. We need to have a little bit more opportunity for them to learn how the American representative democracy works. What does it mean when we say the local government? What is local government versus the state government? Who does what here? And what are the opportunities that's available? Some of those education opportunities, I think, would be critical. And while the kids get that in school, adults don't. First generation immigrants will never have the opportunity to learn those things. And I think it would be great if that were to be included.
If I could hop in here on behalf of the subcommittee, Esau, I think you hit the nail on the head. And in our preliminary talks of where our indicators are going to go and some of those actionable steps, we've specifically referenced some of those training opportunities, Citizen U, Citizen Police Academy, Citizen Fire Academy, all of those venues in which individuals can become more acquainted with their local government, how it works. So I absolutely agree with everything you said.
Thank you.
Any other strong thoughts or opinions? Okay. Well, thank you for your input. It's incredibly beneficial, and I'll make sure that we have an opportunity to speak about it at our next subcommittee meeting. Bridget, if you don't mind, the next piece of the agenda, if we could skip over real quick and come back to it. I have the city practices slide on this slide deck, and it just might be easier if I could pass it over to Homer or Dana, or I can present it.
Okay.
Hey, just so everyone knows, while we're switching, Kirby's got to go defend a thesis here at 7 o'clock-ish, so that's why he's being a little pushy here, guys.
Good luck.
Help you. You can jump whenever you need to, and we'll nudge you as you go.
I was trying to sneak through without anybody knowing. Thanks for blowing the cover.
I think he's got a panel of professors waiting on him after this.
This is more important.
I would say just get off right now and go.
No, this is more. You're more important, Esau. Homer, did you want to, since you're on, did you want to touch on some of these bullet points, or since we met about it, would you like for me to go through them?
Oh yeah, I can certainly talk about them, real quickly. Since you got to get up, since you got to go to your thesis, and we're not going to rat you out and tell your professors that we're all more important than they are. Anyway, but yeah, as you know, I've been meeting with staff, and we're working on an internal strategic plan as well, and we're working through goals and things like that as well. But these were the things that really kind of rise up to city practices and are very consistent with a lot of the work that we're doing. So the first one, a reflective workforce. We have a very strong desire to have our workforce look more like our community. And as you know, you saw the statistics earlier that Kirby briefed, that we've got a long way to go to get there. So that's one of them. Diversity in contracting. We do require our contractors to sign statements that they do have equal opportunity and diverse practices and things like that. But one thing we have not done a very good job of is actually tracking where the vendors come from and how many of them are, you know, minority or female-based or owned organizations. So that's another area we find to be very important to work on. A culturally responsive workforce. It is a goal, but I will tell you, we have done, you know, some work with this, you know, in the past, in terms of cultural awareness and educating people, you know, just with the acknowledgement that we do have a rather, you know, significant amount of our population that, you know, is Asian. I think it's like 23.8%. So a lot of the customs and, you know, things like that, we've tried to make sure that our workforce has gotten an education, but we can still do better in that regard. And then just equity and service. You know, we want to make sure that we're responsive to all, you know, aspects of our community, you know, with the service that we do provide. So those are the goals that, you know, kind of bubble up to the top, you know, for us. So I don't know, Kirby, if you had something else you wanted to add to that, or?
No, you hit the nail on the head, Homer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay.
I did a couple things. I think the reflective workforce is important, and like you said, there's, you know, it's not an easy goal. I guess I would just suggest that the city might want to not just stop at reflecting the current demographics, because I think that current demographics are what we're trying to change. I think we are specifically, and we have a wonderful, strong Asian population, and I know the city is working on trying to, you know, reflect a little bit more. Maybe it's not all the way up to 20%. Maybe it will. We should try to get there. But I mean, I think we are trying to increase the number of Black and Brown residents. And so if the goal is to reflect the current demographics, I feel like that's perhaps maybe not aspirational enough. I don't know how other people feel about that.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily locked into just current demographics. We do, you know, understand that demographics do ebb and flow. They will change over time. And I don't know that you would ever exactly or come, you know, just nail it, you know, so it's an exact same percentage. But yeah, it's just we see a very large disparity when you look at the composition of our workforce versus what the composition of the community is. I mean, 23.8%, you know, Asian in the community, and we have only a handful of you know, people from that demographic that are actually on our workforce. So I think we need to do a better job of getting a lot closer. But yeah, fully aware or fully acknowledge that, yeah, we do have to, it's something you have to keep your finger on the pulse of, you know, going forward. And with our, you know, new director of performance analytics, one of the, you know, measures that we're going to be looking at into the future is actually comparing where we're at versus the community, and just kind of, you know, try and adjust. And it'll always be a goal that we, it's kind of a moving target that we're, you know, still going to have to try and aspire to be closer to. But yes, I fully acknowledge that, and yes. Any other questions or comments? Hey, good luck, Kirby. You got 2 minutes.
We'll have to ask him to share what thesis he's defending the next time he's here, and then we can all shoot it down. I don't know what it is, but he seemed prime for it. I think he'll do a great job, hopefully. So on back to the agenda. So the youth subcommittee, Jamil, do you want to share some more specifics with us? Or was that, when you addressed that one point, was that it for today?
I mean, I mentioned it last time, and there are a few things we touched up on. Like, we just finalized how many people that we think would be on the task, on the youth subcommittee task force. So, I mean, just with that, we figured that there'd be like a 2 and 2. So like 2, I think it's per, I'm trying to figure this out. And it's 2 girls, 2 guys, one from each high school, and then one as an Emerald Campus like representative. that will serve on the community task force. We finalized that. And then, yeah, we kept everything the same about keeping the roundtable talks and working with the school system, recreation, the arts, athletics, and Centero to Better program to serve all. So I think, so with our last meeting, it was really just finishing up, finalizing the youth subcommittee. And so I think we'll be ready to present it pretty soon.
Great, thank you. Before we move on, did anybody have anything to ask him or offer?
Is there going to be a representation from the school district?
Do you mean like a superintendent or like a faculty member?
That we did. Dr. Hoadley having switched his position, obviously we're missing that constant presence representing that district.
At the moment, we actually did not have that. It was more just going to be like a student run that meets with the city council. But we could probably talk about that in our next meeting. But yeah, at the moment, we do not have a faculty member or a superintendent, given that we don't have one at the moment. But yeah.
Dana, is this something that is being talked about with perhaps a direct pipe between the city and the district?
Well, sure. I mean, we will maintain a relationship with them. Right now, they're in transition, and Dr. Marshausen doesn't begin, I don't think, until June, May. I think it's May. And I know I've got a meeting set up with him, even though I already know him and have interacted with him, because a part of Dublin is in the Hilliard School District as well, as you know, and Will represents that. So I do know Dr. Marshausen, so I am on his calendar for once he switches his role. And then certainly we'll invite him to this setting once he gets seated in his new position. So I had invited him to engage with the youth subcommittee in his role as Hilliard superintendent, which he gladly did and was very responsive to. So anyway, when the new Hilliard superintendent's announced, if we can bring them to this forum as well. So also, we should not forget that we also have Jonathan Alder, someone in our school district, in our city as well. So
maybe it's just me, but I just want to understand why we would have a faculty member as part of the youth. Is not the whole goal to have the youth as a voice as the youth and not have to have the constraints of, being under? I don't know. That's just me.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I just think in this case, you just can't, the hierarchy of that, it just sort of undercuts what we are expecting the group of young folks to be able to do together. But maybe there's a way to balance out some reporting or connection with the superintendent and the city where those older folks aren't always showing up at the subcommittee, but they have opportunities to have input or something.
Well, I don't want to speak for our youth subcommittee, but let me tell you this. What I will say about our youth subcommittee is that they are really awesome and they are on it. And when this group decided to have a subcommittee, they were like, we're going to meet every Monday at 5 o'clock and you're all going to be there. And they did a great job of really, taking charge and doing that. And then they invited people to their meeting. But I hope you all don't mind me saying that on behalf of the youth folks here, but they just did a great job of taking charge of their committee. And I would suggest that's probably the way it would be in the future. And then they would invite who they deem necessary to participate in their meeting. So I would hope that's how they would do it. And they did a great job of demonstrating that as part of as a subcommittee when they formed that. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up, Nancy. I certainly agree with that. I suppose in my mind, I wasn't thinking that the student representatives would be under the superintendent in any way. At the very least, they should be equal members. If not, the student members should be the members, and any attendance from I think, Bridget, you're the one that used the older folks language, will be maybe an occasional attendees, or perhaps is there as an observer, or to add some color commentary if asked. I guess more than anything, I wanted to make sure we didn't lose the school position or school representative in this overall task force, not necessarily just on the youth subcommittee.
I totally agree. That's a very important aspect because really a lot of the community move here because of the school. And so the school plays a very central role in the city.
Okay, are we able to move on to the next agenda item, you guys? Thanks for sticking with us. Economics and infrastructure, that's the subcommittee I'm on with Erica and Esau. We just met this morning. Just generally, the update for the subcommittee is we've now drafted 3 priority areas: economic empowerment, which I'll go over here shortly, and you received in an email. And I just refer everybody to Deidre's email that was dated April 15th, and the subject is 420 meeting documents. So meeting documents for today. That has everything we're covering, the demographics and the several of the things we're referring to, including our economic empowerment draft. We also drafted aspirational goals and some more details for housing and mobility / transportation that we'll send out to everybody before our next meeting in a month. And we are very welcoming of input, questions. It's just the first draft, so I'm sure this is how the other subcommittees feel. It's like you're working on something and you think you got a good draft, but of course other minds have other experiences to share, and we don't want to miss out on getting everyone else's input, including the public, not just the task force itself. So I think that I'm supposed to just quickly review the aspirational goals under economic empowerment. And am I a host now? Let's see. I think I am. But I don't know if I want to be a host. I think that was JM going to, I guess I'm trying to figure out where are those slides and who's sharing them. I know I'm speaking to them.
You can share if you want.
All right, let me see if I can find them.
I have them pulled up, Bridget, if you want me to share my
Yeah,
screen.
let's do that. And I'll just tell you to switch over. I'm sorry, I don't have that up.
All right, bear with me 1 second.
So just as background, economic empowerment, we called it priority area number 1 just because it was the first one we were dealing with, but just know that it's a priority area like the other ones that were discussed earlier, this evening. Broadly, the economic empowerment priority area, we have currently drafted this language, which is the City of Dublin creates and supports a citywide environment that promotes and fosters diversity and success among Dublin businesses and business communities. So economic empowerment is primarily focused on the business community broadly defined. And then under economic empowerment, we have 4 aspirational goals. Oops, before I say that, we did want to clarify for folks that when we're thinking of economic empowerment, we are intentionally talking about a broad definition of diversity, but we want to primarily focus on Black and Latino populations. That is not to the exclusion of other diverse populations. We just felt that we needed to, at least we think right now in the draft, that we want to prioritize that focus. Go ahead, JM. And so there's 4 aspirational goals, and they may be meaningless to you. I mean, this language may not mean a lot. It means a lot more when you can see sort of the suggestions that we've drafted under all of these. So I would encourage you to look at that April 15th email from Deidre that gives you the full draft so you can understand where we're going with this. But aspirational goal 1 is the city would prioritize workforce and workplace diversity within the City of Dublin limits by creating, identifying, and supporting programs and businesses that result in increased diversity. The second aspirational goal is we think that the city ought to assess whether there is a wealth gap within the city and whether there is a wealth gap in the broader region. And we sort of define that as, if we think about Dublin City School District generally and Dublin proper, especially when you think about the other, the east side of the river, just trying to get a handle on understanding why there's such a strong perception of difference on either side of the river. And we think that the wealth gap is part of that necessary research to see what people's experiences are, so then we can figure out how to address it. And the city's research would be used to determine which actions could be taken to improve access to resources, improve financial stability, and equitable treatment within the city and regionally. The third aspirational goal is the city modifies existing programs and creates new policies and programs to attract, train, and retain diverse entrepreneurs with long-term support. So this is just recognizing, we got some great feedback from the Economic Development Division today from Colleen Gilger at our subcommittee meeting, and this aspirational goal is focused on entrepreneurship, but it's not to the exclusion of all other types of businesses. It just happened to be highlighted as one of the aspirational goals, and I think we'll end up with more than 4. But I just wanted to point out, we're not trying to elevate entrepreneurial businesses as if they're somehow so much more important than just businesses in general of all sizes and age. And finally, our fourth aspirational goal is the city embraces and widely celebrates a comprehensive and long-term commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in relationship to all things business. And in my mind, this is sort of related to what Esau was saying, where I think we're seeing this, maybe it's not Esau, but I thought part of what you were pointing out was we are seeing some repetitive points that are being made among the different subcommittees. And to me, this is one of those where I think a lot of the subcommittees want to see some version of this. And we are primarily focused on the business community when we're talking about celebrating DEI under economic empowerment. So I know I raced through that, and they're not in front of you guys anymore, but if anybody had any input right now, we'd love to hear it. And or you can certainly email me, Esau, and Erica Adams, anything that you, or call us with input. Esau, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Not particularly. I think you did a great job summarizing it. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're up to agenda item 4, updates. JM?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. With the LGBTQ plus updates, the only thing I wanted to bring attention to for the task force this evening is that Hilliard is currently looking at adding LGBTQ plus protections to their civil rights code. That's something to continue to monitor and see how that effort continues to unfold. It would be interesting to see how that plays into the bigger scheme of things with Dublin. I know, Madam Vice Chair, you may have an update on how that may be unwinding in Dublin.
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure what you're saying.
Oh,
or what you mean.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to touch base on the comment that we
On the-
received
On the letter?
from the resident, right?
Okay.
And then I think also next month we'll be diving more into it.
I didn't know if I was supposed to do that now or under new business, but I think now makes sense.
Sure, go on.
I think you guys, you would have received, I think today, just this evening from Deidre, to the community task force, basically a letter from one of our residents, Peggy Kilty, I think, and she wrote an amazingly wonderful letter, great advocacy on behalf of her child who was applying for a job and identifies as LGBTQ plus. So I think first we wanted to make sure we recognize that we received that input, and we do appreciate input. And I think now the letter is part of the formal record. And I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read it. I did, and I could summarize what it says, or or ask you guys to read it. But basically, I mean, she's pointing out some really important efforts that are on the federal level and the state level, and can be on the Dublin municipal level, to prohibit discrimination against folks based on gender identity, expression, and preference. All of which I think is definitely something that I feel that we need to be, when we're looking at the drafts from each other's subcommittee, we need to be really thinking a little bit more clearly about, are we specifying how we can support the LGBTQ plus community in our recommendations more explicitly. And she has several good ideas.
Yeah, thank you for that summary, and sorry to put you on the spot like that. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share that. But I'm happy to answer any questions that the task force may have with respect to LGBTQ plus issues.
Madam Vice Chair, if you don't mind my adding to that. One of the things that a couple of things that Peggy references in her letter are the non-discrimination ordinances that several cities in the state of Ohio have passed. I think 5 have passed it. We have certainly monitored those as a city. I don't want anyone to think that we have not. We have. The one thing I had suggested to the chair and vice chair in our meeting preparing for tonight was that we would have our legal staff prepare a presentation or background relative to those non-discrimination ordinances that have been passed and are being considered by others. In that way, and present that to the community task force in order that you all sort of gain a full understanding of what those ordinances entail, what they are, what they entail, and what they require. Our city attorneys, as you may know, are with Frost Brown Todd, and they have a public sector office within Frost Brown Todd, and they represent a lot of other cities. And in fact, the same attorneys who represent us are working on the legislation that Hilliard is currently considering. So they're living and breathing this non-discrimination legislation in other cities. And so there's really 2 reasons that this has not been advanced yet with City Council. One is let's see how that goes with the other cities, and what is that entailing and understanding, because it's a pretty lengthy process of putting the legislation in place, number one. And then number 2, frankly, City Council didn't want to get out, in my opinion, ahead of this task force, and wanted the task force to take a look at these kinds of things and see if that's not part of the recommendation of the task force. So I've asked our legal staff to be prepared to brief, if it's okay with you all, on your next meeting in May, to use this meeting as an opportunity to brief you on what that is and give you all the background, so you all have a sort of a common understanding of what that legislation is in other cities and what's currently happening with that. So then from that, then you could have a further dialogue about it. So that's my recommendation to the community task force, and try to get you all up to speed on what these ordinances are.
That would be extremely helpful from my perspective. Thank you for that offer.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I think, Dana, was that legal when they talk about non-discrimination? Were you also going to address like some of the housing challenges when it came to SOI, source of income and stuff, or is that a separate
No, it's pretty overarching and inclusive.
Okay.
Their view, their presentation will be. It's a little bit confusing out there, frankly, because there's several different kinds of ordinances that are happening at federal, state, and local level, as you're suggesting, and federal housing law doesn't do certain things. And so local governments are stepping in and filling a void that federal housing law doesn't cover. And so there's a lot of different aspects to this. And also the types of legislation that are being put in place, there needs to be, and they'll go over this, there needs to be sort of overarching non-discrimination ordinance followed by perhaps other ordinances behind that. So that's where it's a little bit more involved in, let's pass an ordinance. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and there's a lot of administrative requirements as well that follow that. So you have to think through what the second, third, we're all about the non-discrimination aspect of this, but there are other pieces and components of administration that come behind that, and how do you resource that? And so there's a lot of other things that need to follow behind it as well. So that's why we've kind of been really, usually Dublin likes to be out in front on things, but this is one we've been watching closely. The big cities, when they pass this kind of legislation, they're just well resourced to handle what comes behind it. So we were watching the Westervilles and Worthingtons and the like to see how they were structuring themselves to be supportive of that legislation once it's put into place. And so, and then now with our own attorneys, leaning forward with the Hilliard legislation, that even helps us to understand it even more. So that's the first part I mentioned. The second part is really giving this task force an opportunity to have a dialogue about it as well. So I hope that answers your question. I didn't mean to go too far down the road.
That's great. Does anybody else have anything for JM? Thank you, JM. And then I think Esau and Chief, you guys wanted to give us some input on or update on the Chief's Advisory Committee. I'm not sure who was going to share.
I can start, and Chief, you can fill in whatever I miss. So the last meeting was actually just a couple days after our last meeting. It does feel like it was a long time ago now. Started out by Chief going through the Dublin Police Awards for 2020. It was great to see for the advisory committee members to see the members of the department that were getting recognized, as well as the community volunteers that get recognized for their contribution to public safety in Dublin. And we heard from Director Somerville about mutual aid agreements that are in place for the Dublin and its surrounding communities, as well as special meeting response. So what notice is required for us to have a special meeting? That conversation came about because of many current events that seemingly just continue to happen, and the voices of the committee members of wanting to, if needed, be able to respond very quickly, what was necessary for us to hold these special meetings. And we continued to hear from Lieutenant Latanzi and Corporal Stoll took part as well. Continuation of the use of force policy, specifically in the last meeting, rendering aid. So, at what point is the Dublin Police Department personnel required to call for aid, for example? That conversation took place. And then actually before that, we also heard from Cameron, just as one of our committee members, about potential recommendations that we are considering regarding SROs, school resource officers. You know that we as the committee have spent much time discussing school resource officers and that whole program, how well that is functioning and how to improve it. in its effectiveness. And so we talked about some of the recommendations that are being tossed around, which will be finalized at some point in the near future. And then the last meeting was taken up by discussion on the current event. If you recall, at that time, it was literally maybe a day or two after the shooting in Atlanta, where many women of Asian descent were among the victims. So there was a time for sharing, as well as a discussion on what type of responses would be expected or reasonable and preferred from the police department. And there was a voice recommending that some sort of a public statement be made to let the whole city know where the police department stands and where the city stands. And to the credit of Chief and Dana, it was, I think, literally the next day that city came out with a statement on that event that strongly defended the diversity and strongly condemned the violence. So I have not talked to the committee members after that on this specific topic, but I would imagine that there is a much sense of appreciation for how quickly the city and the police department in particular acted upon that incident and made their stance known. That is my report.
Isa, thank you for covering the last meeting. I appreciate you, certainly, and the rest of the committee members being willing to share. We have intended in the last couple of meetings to hold time to talk about current events, and it's become hopefully one of the highlights of each meeting. It's to bring dialogue to the table, much in the same way we all came together in both the task force and the advisory committee capacities from over the summer, and from council's initiative in enacting these two groups, holding space to talk about current events, I think is a really important way for us to continue to have dialogue and to be aware of the things that not only are occurring as conversations in Dublin as a community, but across the nation as it relates to policing in America, and using that opportunity with committee members to have some honest dialogue and conversation about where we want to go in our partnership in this community and public safety. So thank you again for recapping the meeting.
Does anybody have any comments or questions to add? Thank you guys for that update. We're very close to done, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. New business. We already went over the letter from that we received. I didn't know if there was any specific new business anybody wanted to bring up at this time. Nope. Okay. Our next meeting is going to be May 18th from 6 to 8 p.m., which again is the third Tuesday. So please look at your calendars and try to attend. We need you here and appreciate your time and effort and commitment to this. Can I have can I move to adjourn and get a second from somebody?
You can.
I'm moving to adjourn. Can I have a second?
I second.
All right, I think that was Aesop or Vincent. Thank you. Everybody in favor, I'm sure we'll say wave goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Chief, for support. Good night.